Nicholas Rossi update! And here is everything that went down on day 1 of his Utah criminal trial. Rossi was dressed quite conservatively in a black suit and blue tie, a far cry from the Hugh Hefner pajamas and judge's robes that we've come to expect from him. Judge Lawrence gave the jury instructions, and the first order of business was to make sure that everyone understood that Nicholas Rossi, Nicholas Alahverdian, Arthur Knight, and whatever the hell else he calls himself are all the same dude sitting right there in this courtroom. That is not up for debate. Are we clear? Moving on. Opening arguments came next, and Rossi's public defender, Mackenzie Potter, said this case was like a jigsaw puzzle that you bought at a thrift store. You get it home and there's lots of pieces missing, so that you never really understand what the full picture was actually supposed to look like. And prosecutor Brandon Simmons said, "Your Honor, pieces are missing because you excluded certain evidence for being prejudicial, like faking his own death, or the 2 years he spent in Scotland trying to fight extradition, or most of the other accusations against him. So if pieces are missing, it's because you threw them out." And the judge said, "Yeah, but what are you gonna do?" But we will get to all that later, as it was time to call the first witness, the victim, whose name and face we will not show. She detailed that in September of 2008, she had an accident on a scooter that left her with a traumatic brain injury. 2 months of recovery later, and she finally felt well enough to put herself out there again. So she started looking at the personal ads on Craigslist, which is a thing you did before Tinder and Bumble. And she came across Rossi's ad and found him intriguing. The relationship progressed quickly because 1 week after their first date, they went shopping at the mall for Black Friday, and Rossi ushered her into a jewelry store and said, "Hey, they've got a sale on engagement rings. Let's spend the rest of our lives together. Say yes, say yes, say yes." Now, if you think that's rushed, remember, this is Utah, and the victim had just converted to Mormonism. All of her friends were already married, so there was a lot of pressure on her from all angles to get hitched. But Rossi had no job and no money. In fact, he had already borrowed $1,000 from her, her entire savings, to pay off the overdue rent he owed his roommate. But he said, "Listen, we're gonna spend eternity together. What's mine is yours. So why don't you just fill out this credit application, borrow $2,000 for our rings, and we'll come back in a month when they're ready." And the next month turned to shit. Rossi made her pay for all of their dates, mocked what she wore and how she looked, insisted on driving all the time even though it was her car, and constantly chipped away at her self-worth. Classic abuser behavior. It all culminated on the day they picked up their engagement rings at the mall. Rossi was being an absolute asshole to her, and she thought to herself, nah, took off the ring and ditched him. Rossi followed her back to the car and just went apeshit, screamed at her, kicked and pounded on the car, and blocked her in, preventing her from leaving. Eventually, he calmed down and she let him in, saying, "I'm gonna drive you home, and that's it." But that was a major mistake, because back at the house, Rossi refused to get out. He even pretended to call the cops and accuse her of hitting him, and he wouldn't get out until the cops showed. After an hour of ranting at her, he finally calmed down again and confessed that he didn't actually call the cops, but that they should go inside and talk about it, which she did. They were all alone in the house. Rossi's roommate wasn't around, and they went into Rossi's bedroom. The victim said, "I think we should break up," and that's when Rossi shoved her onto the bed. And I'm not going to repeat the graphic description of what happened next, but suffice to say, it was very difficult to listen to. She told the jury that she didn't fight him off because she was scared. If he was capable of doing that, what else was he capable of? She left Rossi's house and told her parents what happened, and her dad said, "You probably deserved it." I know, right? F that guy forever. But thinking that not even her parents had her back, the victim thought, "I'm not going to put myself through the hell of reporting this to the cops." The victim changed her number, but Rossi still emailed her relentlessly. And she was still on the hook for the money that Rossi owed her, so she said, "I'm going to take you to small claims court." And Rossi filed a cease and desist letter against her, and she figured out that hiring a lawyer was going to be more than the $3,000 Rossi owed her, so she just let it go. She moved on because Rossi was finally gone from her life, until 13 years later when Arthur Knight popped up on the news, and that's when she decided, I'm gonna go to the cops. Public defender Samantha Dugan was up now to do a cross-examination. You said you had a brain injury. Were you confused? No. Memory loss? No. Headaches? Actually, it cured my migraines. When he was kicking the car and blocking you in, why didn't you just run him over? Who runs somebody over? Why did you drive him home? Because it was December in Utah and I'm a good person. Dugan then went on trying to trip the victim up on dates, order of events, and recollection of details that she told the police back in 2022, implying that she's either remembering wrong or even fabricating the details. And eventually, the defense flat out accused the victim of making the whole story up because she was still mad that Rossi stiffed her over $3,000 back in 2008. The victim simply said, no. The next witness was called, and it was the victim's mom. The testimony was pretty brief. She described Rossi as being polite, but kind of fishy. He was bragging that he was gonna go to Harvard someday, and that he used to be in the Navy, swabbing decks and loading missiles, but that he had to quit because of a back injury. She said that after the attack, when the victim's father, and she stresses that is now her ex-husband, victim shamed their own daughter, she was stunned into silence. And when she finally went to her daughter, tried to be compassionate and urging her to go to the police, her daughter would have none of it. She had just shut down and withdrawn entirely. So she also let it go. The last witness of the day was Dr. Kenneth Roach, a mental health counselor and victims advocate. And his testimony was mostly about delayed reporting and rape myths. The misconception that most of us, even police, have about assault versus the way it really is. For example, most of these attacks are done by someone the victim knows really well. Most of the time, it doesn't cause any physical injuries, and the victim doesn't fight back in a lot of cases. Most of the time, the victim doesn't report it, and if they do, it can be weeks, months, or even years later. Staying in touch with the attacker afterwards is not uncommon, and yes, memory can be a tricky thing. Basically, all the questions you or the jury might have about why did the victim do this or why didn't they do that? And the answer is because you have preconceived notions about the way someone should behave, and quite often, those notions are wrong. And with that, Day 1 came to a close. 8 hours of solid testimony, which I watched all for you guys. Day 2 is tomorrow, and the first witness will be the other victim from Rossi's next trial, and her testimony should definitely be something. Stay tuned.